Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today we are excited to be talking about blended learning. And this might be a term that you've heard before, but maybe don't really understand fully what it involves. So today we're going to break that down for you. Sarah, what would you say blended learning is? What's your best definition of blended learning?
Yeah, great question. To me, blended learning is combining an in-person or in-classroom approach with and blending that with online education. So I believe it would involve a lot of hands-on teaching experiences just because of the nature of what it is. But in my mind, what makes sense to me when I think of blended learning is you're taking away time that a teacher would typically be spending teaching to a classroom full of students. And because that takes up a ton of time, some teachers will lecture an entire classroom hour, leaving little to no time to actually interact with the students on a one-on-one basis or small group basis. So you're taking away that time and allowing students to access instructional materials on their own, which frees up the teacher or the in-classroom staff or even a parent, if students are working from home, to interact with their students and talk about what was learned, what was presented to them, instead of just having the student sit there and consume information during that valuable time where it could be spent interacting with the student.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another term that is thrown out a lot is this concept of hybrid learning, which is essentially what blended learning is because
Mhm.
you're right, you have the learning online where you're absorbing these concepts and then that hands-on face-to-face experience with either an online teacher or an in-classroom teacher where then you're getting that more in-depth discussion and
Right,
opportunity to recognize the real world application skills for that so that it's
right.
a little more, like you said, involved.
Yeah. I think it seems like it's catching on in certain school districts and private schools. But many schools will still follow that same traditional approach where a student goes to class,
Yeah.
sits there, gets lectured, and then they come home and they do their homework at home without the support of a teacher. And sometimes the parents are like, what the heck?
No?
I don't know how to do this, right? So imagine it, the other way around. And sometimes they call that a flipped classroom model,
Hmm.
where the student is able to access the instructional materials on their own. And then the teacher can act like more of a mentor,
Hmm.
or what we might think of as like a one-on-one tutor, where now the teacher or in-classroom staff, or like I said before, even a parent, isn't having to teach the material to the student for the first time. They can work with the student on that one-on-one basis to
Yeah,
address some of the concepts that were taught.
totally. And then, yeah, just expounding upon that or answering questions, things that were maybe unclear for the student from the
Mm-hmm.
first time absorbing it. Because, yeah, I think that's also why a lot of schools are kind of getting away from the homework model as well, at least in younger grades. I've heard where, students in kindergarten through fifth grade don't really have homework per se because they're really getting that in the classroom and they're
Mm-hmm.
learning it. So then they don't have to kind of go home and have the extra conversation either.
Totally.
So it's kind of like you said, emerging in these schools and in these school districts, private schools, because they found that it is effective. Because, yeah, you think back to like even my college days, you're sitting there in a
Mm-hmm.
lecture for an hour and a half or whatever, and then you're taking all these notes, and then later you look back at them and say, okay, what was this in reference to? And then you have to set up time to go talk to the TA during their
Mm-hmm.
office hours that might not always work with your schedule.
Right.
And so this idea of blended learning where they have the opportunity to kind of have that self-guided learning where they're learning the concepts and then getting the support from a teacher
Mm-hmm.
or we call them mentors at our school, where they have that face-to-face time to just expound upon and explore these ideas of, oh, hey, this didn't make sense, can you break it down for me a little bit more, is
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more effective, because then, like you said, it's going to be that one-on-one attention kind of individualized to the student versus just lecturing to an entire population of
Right.
students.
Right. I've always said that, and I think a lot of people would agree that your typical classroom, especially in a public school setting, is set up to cater to the average student.
Mm-hmm.
So the students that are performing at a really high level and, you know, are maybe advanced for their age, that doesn't work well because the teacher is moving at a pace that caters to the average student in the classroom. And that will cause a student to become very unengaged, like very bored.
Yeah.
You know, having to sit through a lecture when they could be moving through curriculum at a faster pace based on whatever their level is. Same thing with students who might be struggling a little bit more.
Yeah.
That pace might be too fast for them, where the teacher is going through something, you know, a topic during a lecture, and really they need the teacher to slow down a little bit, where in a blended model, that student can have access to that instructional material, take a little bit more time, and it can be scaled. So really, to me, one main reason why this is such an effective model for students is it meets them where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we strive for at Mountain Point Academy too. It of course looks a little bit different because, you know, many of our students are at home. So it's not a true blended model in that they're getting that in-person classroom instruction because they're with a parent, and a parent or guardian can't always provide that for them. But we really meet students where they're at. So they can access the instructional material on their own, at their own pace, in their own time. And then the follow-up happens with their mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they get that face-to-face, that one-on-one time where you can address some of the things that you know came up in the instructional videos or in the interactive labs or projects. And it's a lot more engaging for the student instead of just sitting there in a classroom. I think back to college too, like the lecture halls, that was the worst. I struggled with that so much because I'm somebody who just craves that interaction with people, you know, on a personal level. And I like, you know, when my instructor knows who I am.
Yeah.
And that was something I always struggled with because you're sitting there and it's just like, oh my gosh, you know, there's 100 or more people in one classroom and you're just being lectured at.
Yeah. Yeah. You're just a face. They don't really know you. They don't know where you're at. Kind of like you said, you know, are they meeting me where I'm at? Because I'm just one of, 90 kids that's in this class. And they just really, okay, here's your grade, boom, talk to my TA. You know, you kind of feel like you're passed off a little bit. Whereas, the beauty of like an online program like ours with its asynchronous environment where students can just log in and kind of go at their own pace gives them that opportunity to, like you said, either accelerate or take it slower and break it down and say, okay, this isn't making sense. How can I understand this? Take notes, take a step back, and then in that, you know, conversation with their mentor, really ask those questions and have kind of the detailed breakdown of, okay, where are you at? Mm-hmm. How can we get you to where you need to be to understand this concept and pass your essay or your lab project or whatever it may be? And so it kind of is that, you know, and like you said before, that it's not a true blended model in the sense that, there's a teacher face-to-face with the student, but there are those pre-recorded lectures where a teacher is giving that instruction. And then later the face-to-face comes with the mentor and getting that. And so it's kind of that hybrid in the sense of you're getting the instruction plus the support.
So you keep saying mentors, and we brought up mentors, but what, explain if you can, what in your own words, what the difference between a mentor and a teacher looks like, because our mentors are teachers.
They are.
So why do we call them mentors?
Yeah, great question. So really, like we mentioned with the asynchronous platform, you have these pre-recorded lectures from teachers, right? That are certified teachers presenting the content so that it's an understandable format for students. And then we call them mentors because really they're in there face-to-face with the students, not only addressing questions like, hey, I don't understand how to write a 5-paragraph essay. Can you help me out? But they're taking it a step further and saying, hey, what are your goals for this class? What are your goals for your high school education? What are your, you know, dreams and aspirations? Kind of goal setting along the way so that they can also get the skills to not only pass their courses, but also in life, just learning how to set and achieve goals so that they
Mhm.
can achieve everything they want to, right? So we're taking it a step further and mentoring instead of just, okay, here's your assignment, cool, here's an A, here's a B, pass you on,
Mhm.
right? It's really kind of building that relationship so that the student feels like they have an advocate and a cheerleader in their corner supporting them and helping them learn skills like goal setting that are going to be applicable not just for high school but throughout their entire lives. And so to me, that's kind of the beauty of the mentoring program and why we call them mentors instead of just, hey, you're my teacher, help me answer a question, right? Because we want to help them feel success in their personal lives as well as their academic lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I that was a great way of stating it, and I agree. We could call our teachers teachers because they are, for the most part, certified teachers that we have on staff, but um, mentoring just gives it a whole new definition and approach. And that's one thing that I love about our model. And just allowing some space for a professional relationship to be built between mentor and student, and just pouring into that student and letting them know that they really do have an advocate and there's somebody that cares about them and knows what they're doing. So that's huge. And with our model, I would call it, um, like I mentioned before, some public schools or brick and mortar schools will use what they call a flipped classroom approach, and that's to me similar to what we do. So even though we're all online, um, it's that flipped model. So we don't have those live lecture hall type setups where you do see in some online schools. Some online schools, you'll log into a Zoom call or a Google Meet, and you'll have 30 kids or whatever all on this call. And that time is just used for the teacher
To
to teach
present. Yeah.
material. Right. And so if that's the only interaction the student is getting with the teacher, is just consuming information from the teacher, it doesn't leave you with a whole lot of time to actually interact with your teacher and build that relationship and that rapport, and just have that feeling of like, hey, somebody actually cares about what I'm doing and wants to see me succeed
Hmm.
holistically, right?
Yeah.
So I love
Totally.
that.
Yeah, I think it's great. And what's interesting is we kind of did start as just the, hey, here's your class, go for it. We'll send you a weekly report to let you know how you're doing. And it was a little bit more disconnected. And then we decided, no, we want online learning to be more like connected learning where the student feels like their teacher cares, right?
Mhm.
Because in a traditional classroom, I think you can get that a little bit easier where you're like, oh, your teacher knows who you are and
Mhm.
where you're at. You see all those viral videos that go around about like the elementary school teachers or even the middle school teachers that have like secret handshakes with all of their kids. So as they're entering the classroom, they do their individual handshake and like, hey bud, like welcome to class, and we don't have that because with online learning, like obviously we're not there in person. So it's like, how do you still foster that connection and that learning online? And so this mentoring program is kind of a way to do that, where they feel like, oh, hey, I'm actually like, I matter. You care what's going on in my class instead of
Mhm.
just, okay, cool, here's your numbers, good job, keep working hard. It's
Right.
it's more of a, oh my gosh, like you actually care. And we compared numbers, data, right? Of the students beforehand and their success rate, their passing rate, versus then once we started this mentoring program. And the difference was insane. We were like, holy cow, the kids are a little bit more excited to learn now, right? Because they feel like somebody cares and they're not just on their own watching these lectures and then, well, where do I go to get help? I don't even know where to go to get help. And that's also the beauty of the mentoring calls weekly, is then we can say, oh, hey, it looks like you're struggling a little bit in math. Let's set you up with our math tutor. And then they can get further one-on-one attention to really address what their questions are,
Mhm.
which is huge because I know for me in high school, math was not my forte. Like I had to get tutoring. Like there was no way I was going to understand the concepts. And so again, being further stepped back in an online world, okay, how do we bridge that gap? Because I don't have a teacher or I don't have a tutor that's, sitting right next to me all the time.
mentioned that you required or you needed tutoring.
Yeah.
So in a typical classroom setting that doesn't use blended learning, when do you do that? When is there time for that?
Yeah.
You have to go, like you said, at the college level, the TA would sometimes have availability, or maybe your professor would have a time block that you could meet
But
with
then
them.
you're competing with 15 other kids that are
Right.
there for the same thing, right?
So definitely the beauty of a blended program is it frees up the teacher to actually walk around the classroom. You maybe get some hands-on learning activities going, small groups. And it looks a little different for us. So for those who don't know, we work with both individual families, so students who are just at home doing our program um, from the comfort of their home. And then we also work with clients, group clients, most of which happen to be residential treatment centers. And so that's more of a true blended
Yeah.
model because we have, say, anywhere between 6 and 16 or 20, maybe more kids in one classroom. And they're all doing, our online program, Mountain Point Academy Online, but they have staff members on site that actually can walk around and talk to each individual student, say, how are you doing? What are you working on today? What can I help you with? So that's definitely, we implement it in that way. So it's going to look a little bit different for students who are at home because parents are probably like, wait a minute, I'm not a teacher. How does that work? Can I still use your program? And it will look a little bit different for you. But what we always say is, without having to be in a typical brick and mortar setting where students are wasting time going from class to class in the hallways, and you got lunch and you have this and that, and 10 minutes at the start of each class where a teacher's taking roll call or whatever. You're condensing everything into maybe about, what would you say, 4 hours?
Half the time of a traditional school day. Yeah.
And that is freeing the students up to have more of those one-on-one or hands-on activities at home. So even if a parent doesn't feel qualified to teach a specific subject, there are real world experiences that are just as valuable as your typical in classroom or school learning activities. Going to a museum, for instance, you can do things like that when you're enrolled in an online school. There's so much more time to go out and do things in the middle of the day when everyone else is in school, right? So the museums and everything are a lot quieter at that time. You can go out and experience those things. Plant a garden or whatever. There's so many things that you can do when you have this type of model. Just more flexibility.
Totally.
So we're passionate about it, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and as you were saying that, I was like, and then thinking of, the older students too, like 10th, 11th, 12th grade, like getting a job and having flexibility for more hours and opportunity to learn those real world skills as well. So I think there is, like you said, some value. And so parents that are maybe thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know how to teach math, or I don't know how to do chemistry, well, that's the beauty of, there's the lectures, they can take notes, and then they can connect with their mentor later. And then that's where the gaps are filled in. And, there might be some frustration of, well, I don't understand this, or I don't understand this. But as you're out having those experiences, you can figure out ways to tie it back into certain concepts as well. Like you're in a social studies class, you go to a museum. Oh, hey, great. Let's talk about, XYZ, because it all ties into what you're learning in your class. Or you're in an economics class and you have your job, you can figure out, oh, this makes sense for economics, supply and demand. There's so many real world applications that can happen. And like you said, there's so much value in real world learning as well, which is something we do encourage because, digital space is not real life. And so getting out there and having the hands-on experience while also being kind of supplemented by an online learning experience is kind of blending the two and making it more cohesive.
So yeah, in that regard, that might not be your traditional definition of blended learning.
Yeah.
But maybe it's our version of blended learning, like hybrid learning, where we're involving that experiential piece. And having your more the traditional, classroom experience that somebody might relate to
Mm-hmm.
is consuming the material through a lecture. Except for in our instance, in our situation, it's just pre-recorded so that students can access it at their own time.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Yeah.
best of both worlds, really.
Yeah. Awesome. But yeah, if you're listening to this wondering, oh my heck, what's blended learning? How can I help my student do this? Or is this a good option for my student? We're always doing free consultation calls. We're happy to field your phone calls, see if it would be a good option for your student, and see if it would be a good fit for them to just have that flexibility of the blended learning model where they can then have freedom to explore other avenues as well. So give us a call. We'll put the link in the show notes. But thanks for tuning in for today's discussion about blended learning. And we're really excited because next week we're going to have our first career day interview, which this was kind of the driving force behind the podcast that we were excited about, was just to interview professionals in their field and talk to them about, what education means to them, why it's important, and what students would potentially need to be that professional person in the future as well. So hopefully trying to reignite the spark of why education is important and why it matters for their future, just so they can get excited about learning as well. So
Heck yeah.
yeah. So stay tuned for next week. We'll chat then.